Hi everyone, this is Chris Harley from Data Basics. We've got just about 2 o'clock here Eastern Time. I was going to give everyone about another 15, 20 seconds or so to join in, and then we'll go ahead and get started here in just a minute. Okay, well it's 2 o'clock, and so let's go ahead and get started here. Let me move my GoToMeeting web bar out of the way a little bit. Well, first and foremost, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us here this afternoon or late morning, depending upon where you may be. The purpose of our webinar today is to talk about why non-project-based companies are adopting a project-based version of expense reporting, and why organizations are seeing value, and as we talk about here, why it may be something that you as an organization may be interested in as well. I was looking to take somewhere in the ballpark of probably 25 minutes or so here, so hopefully not too long here today. As far as a quick background, my name is Chris Harley, the Vice President of Sales here at Data Basics. The presentation that we will be providing, we are recording, and so we will certainly provide you guys a recorded version of this. You will also be able to access it either at our website or on YouTube if you go out and look at the Data Basics channel. And you may notice within the GoToMeeting web bar, there is the ability for you to actually ask questions or chat. So if you have any questions during that process, please feel free to go in there and ask any questions at any point in the presentation. I will check as I kind of go through the presentation to see if there's anything that's relevant to what I'm talking about at that immediate moment. If so, I can certainly stop. Otherwise, what I may do is wait till the end and answer those questions as they happen. For those of you that aren't familiar with Data Basics, we are a cloud-based provider of expense reporting and timesheet solutions. We are based in the greater Washington, D.C. area and have been providing time and expense solutions here for about 20 years. So as we look at the solution and the items that we're going to talk about today, this is certainly something we've been doing for a good long while. As far as the application today, I'm not going to talk about any specific integration points as it relates to individual vendors, but we do really work across the spectrum of providers out there. So depending upon who you may be using for on the back end accounting side, or maybe on the front end for a payroll or an HR piece, I will safely say that we certainly have worked with those organizations in the past, and as well we'll continue to do it there in the future. The solution you're looking at today is a global offering out there. And as it relates to our overall, where we fit in the marketplace, we certainly do work with a good number of project companies, which we'll talk about today. But really, our primary focus is on providing organizations a solution that's going to meet 100% of their requirements out of the box. I mentioned Data Basics is a global organization, and so as you look at our customer base, you will certainly see organizations that do business throughout the world. Here's just a quick sampling of some of those organizations, and what you're going to see is a cross-section of everything from federal contractors to retail operations to entertainment organizations out there. Total customer base today, again, we'll cover all industries and verticals, and we'll really actually cover all organizations of all sizes. And I know looking at the group of individuals that will be sitting in on this webinar today, again, I would say you probably cover all industries and verticals, and I will say also we've seen organizations that both are small, medium, and large out there. And really, as we look at kind of the takeaway today, when we're done this webinar, is a couple things we really want to focus on. Is first and foremost, current trends. Why did we come up with this thought of talking about how organizations who traditionally aren't project-based can leverage the technology that others are? We certainly want to show you how you're able to use the technologies that are out there to help you. I will cover a number of different organizations that are currently using this technology, similar to what we'll look at there. And then what we'll do is touch upon the actual application. So I'll open up the Data Basics tool, take you through a couple scenarios, and let you see how, again, organizations are able to go ahead and take this information and use it to their advantage there on the expense reporting front. So with that, let's kind of start with the first question here, which hits. I know we all typically joke that expense reporting is really kind of a necessary evil. Typically when you go out to an organization, especially one that's coming off a manual process or an Excel process, we look at, what are the reasons that you're looking to automate that process? That's kind of the first question. Well, why are you looking to automate it? Of course, as you look at the organization, just general accounting practices. We have expenses that are taking place. We need to get those details over to the general ledger to account for those expenses. As well, since those expenses are taking place oftentimes by individuals out in the field, if those employees are actually using their own funds to make those purchases, there is going to be some sort of employee reimbursement component of there. So as the organization looks at that, there's kind of the two primary focuses. Now, of course, as it relates to the employee reimbursement side, it brings in a lot of those questions out there, which is how do we speed up this process and how do we make sure that we lessen the burden on the user? Now, typically an organization is going to really ask for the most basic details. And the reason for that, again, as we'll get into in a minute, is just because we're trying to really lessen the burden on the user. But when you look at a traditional project-based company, and what we would call a traditional project-based organization would be someone that you think of would be like a professional services firm, or a construction or an architectural engineering outfit. When they do their expenses, depending upon the type of expense out there, and we may be talking about billable type activities or non-billable activities, there's always some sort of project component of it. And so the idea is if I'm going to fly or buy an airplane ticket to fly to see a client, we need to track who that client is. Again, whether we're going to bill that expense back to the client or just track it internally. And so as we look at that process, we always would say for a traditional project-based company, of course they're going to track to a project. Of course they're going to track to a client, because that's, again, part of their standard accounting practice out there, whether we're doing this for a billing purpose or doing it just for internal tracking purposes. And so there's always been kind of that segment. When organizations call us, the first things one of our individuals from the business development or sales team would ask is, well, what are you doing with these expenses? Are you tracking these back to a customer or not? And most often cases when someone says we're tracking to clients or projects, obviously there's a natural fit. Well, in that case, you want to go ahead and leverage the project functionality there within our application. But really the conversation today relates to those companies who are not traditionally project-based. And what we're starting to see is that when we have conversations with organizations, that I would call non-traditional project-based companies, is that we're starting to hear questions. People say, well, we would love to be able to track additional information out there. And so we would typically ask, well, why are you not doing it? And that really kind of comes into the challenges out there. And so the reason people aren't tracking to additional details, and what I would call additional details would be the ability to start taking and looking at an expense and saying, was there an event that we were traveling for? Were we sending sales reps or marketing folks to a trade show? Were we taking people on an internal incentive trip out there? Or do people just go ahead and purchase expenses for items that, again, would be for internal tracking purposes? And the challenge with an organization like that is, and as most of you understand on the phone, is that when that data typically flows back over into the accounting solution, even if you're using a piece of Excel, an Excel format out there, the details to what those expenses were for, or an event or some sort of entertainment purchase out there, there's typically no detail out there. And so that's one of the things we really want to focus on here is how do we allow an organization to do that? Now the challenges, first and foremost, of course, is the extra effort required from the employees. We talk about not burdening employees, and why do we want them not to provide these details if we're not going to be able to do anything with them? The second piece is, well, okay, so we decide we're going to go ahead and track this information against an event. How do we validate that data? How do we make sure that all the individuals that are traveling for a certain event, when they get to enter that data into the expense tool or onto the expense form, that they're actually using the same terminology so that when it comes into the finance group, we can actually figure out what that event was for. And so as we look at that, what we typically say is the technology is limited in it. And we will talk today about how technology can certainly help that out. And the last thing is, what do you do with that data? Okay, so now I've got all this data. How am I able to organize that data and to be able to put it into a format or put it into a view that I can actually just do something with? So it brings us to the question today of, is there an easier way to do this? And how do we do this in a traditional non-project environment? And so when we get to that question, that people often ask us, hey, Chris, is there a way for us to do this even though, we aren't a professional service firm? The first thing we always say is yes, that there's technology out there, and what that technology is doing is it's solving these challenges at a number of levels. what that technology is solving is, first off, it's providing the users a very quick and easy lookup so that they can see the information and quickly enter it in, whether it relates to a single expense type or whether it relates to the entire expense report. The second thing it's doing is it's going to come over as a valid data. So if you're able to set that information up within the master record of within the expense tool, in our case, or even someplace else within the accounting solution, we can pull that data over so that we can validate and control what the lookups look like to make sure that the employee isn't miskeying or entering information that's not really relevant to them. And the last thing we can do is that once that data is in our solution, we can organize it and put it into views and reporting processes there so that you can quickly get to that information, regardless of whether you push that information over to the accounting solution, which you typically would not be, but how you can actually get to that information. So what happens? So once we go ahead and start leveraging the ability to track to individual events and tasks and clients within a expense tool, what can we do with it? And so the first thing organizations do is budget. And so if we have, and I'll use the event a number of times today, if we've got a certain event, and let's think of a trade show where you may be sending a number of employees out to, whether it's a show that you guys are putting on as an organization or whether you're sending sales reps out to, you're able to go in and say, okay, I've got a budget, and I can put together this budget based upon what we project the airfare, the lodging, the conference fees, the typical meals would be for the individual city where that person may be. And you can have it sit within the application basically as a budget. And as the employees go and enter those expenses, we can have the employee track those expenses against that event. And again, it'll all roll right up into that budget. The other thing we can do is we can build policies against some sort of field out there. So if we want to go out and say, well, for this event, maybe it's an incentive trip, and we're going to allow people to purchase and fly in let's say an upgraded fare of airfare, a first class ticket. Maybe they can purchase it when they're going to this event, but they can't make those purchases for some other type of event. Obviously, with those analytics now within the application, what we're able to do is go out there and improve the decision making. So what we're doing is taking a process for an organization, again, if I was talking to a professional service firm or an architectural engineering firm, this would be kind of standard accounting practices. Of course, we're tracking back to the details. Of course, we have this information. But now what we're doing is trying to apply those same sort of accounting practices just on the expense reporting front to the organization to give them the same sort of reporting level that they're able to get to out there. And as we look at some of those traditional types of organizations out there, and I just kind of picked 3 data basics organizations that, again, I would say you would consider as kind of non-traditional in the project orientation world. You look at a company like a Sony Music or a Tesla Motors out there, or even a Trident Seafood. All of these organizations take our application and they give the ability for the employee, and I should say, when I say give the employee, I should say they actually mandate for the employee to go in and track to some sort of additional level of detail. So the user may go out and say, I'm renting a car today because I'm in Wichita, but what we're also going to have in that line item expense type is, well, I'm in Wichita and I'm also visiting this particular client, and so I want to get to that information. Or we are out there visiting this certain venue, and so we want to go out and see that information. And so when that information is entered into the solution, what Sony is able to do is to come back at the end of the week, the month, quarter, year, and say, okay, well, how much do we spend looking at this particular venue? Or what do we spend looking at, for this type of trip out there? And now they're able to go out and get those analytics. And again, Sony would not pull that data over into the accounting solution. They don't care about it on the accounting side. But the individuals making decisions and looking at that information are all able to do that, leveraging the expense reporting platform. So with that, I can kind of stop talking and looking at PowerPoint presentations. And what I want to do is actually open up the actual solution and kind of show you the way this looks as it relates to the individual entry from a project orientation side. Now, in this case, what I've already done is I've already logged into the data basics offering. And so this would be the traditional view that a user would see. And as a user comes in here to do their expense report, they can see that they've got credit card transactions out there and some receipts that have been auto-imported into the solution coming over from individual vendors. So this person's ready to go in and start entering in individual expenses on their expense report. So the process becomes quite straightforward, that I'm going to come out here to do my expense report. And again, for an organization out there who traditionally does not track to expenses, what happens is the user may come out here and say that I'm going to the sale, let's just call it the sales kickoff meeting for Vegas, and let's say this just happened a few weeks ago. And I can say that, I was out in Vegas on the 6th of November and I came back on the 10th. In this particular case, as we talk about tracking additional data, this is also giving us, within the database solution, the ability to go out and to track information such as what city I'm in. And so I can now say that, hey, I was traveling to Las Vegas. And so most expense platforms are going to have a tool out here where I can go out and auto pick up the department I'm in. So obviously that's just my natural default GL code out there in my cost account as it relates to my department. But you'll notice here that it's asking the employee to go ahead and provide a meeting or event. And again, as you look at a lot of expense platforms, they may give you this ability. But what it doesn't have is the ability to validate this information. So I'm going to ask the user, well, why are you heading to Vegas? And of course, I had these details very basically in this entry. But in this case, the user is going to go out and look up and say, well, you know what, I was there for the Vegas sales kickoff in 2017. Now, what you'll notice here is this user actually has both 2017 and 2018. So we've already have it set up for next year if we want to start looking at those details. So very simply, the user can come in here and pick that information. Now, if you wanted to create a true lookup, I have the ability for the user to come in here and basically look at all these details. So again, we have a true validation and lookup. And all the information that we're going to capture here at the front end as it relates to the expense entry is going to roll over into the reporting platform, which I'll show you in a minute. So I'm always able to go out and set information. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and do my expense report here for this Vegas kickoff. So again, I'm in my expense report, and I won't worry about some of the other feature functionality out there today, but in a very basic fashion, let me come out here and just say I had an airfare expense, and we'll say this took place on the 6th of November. How much was it? Let's just say the airplane ticket was $524. So again, this is a view that you're going to traditionally see as it relates to an individual user out there doing any sort of expense report. The view that we've added, though, is over here as we look at this allocation. What I have behind the scenes is I've got this airfare is now being tracked over to this Vegas kickoff. So everything this user is doing, and again, it becomes a very simple entry. If this user wanted to go out and leverage OCR, so let's say this person happened to take an Uber trip when they landed at McCarran Airport from the airport over into the hotel. Again, he has a receipt here from Uber. He can go ahead and have this Uber receipt added to the report. So we're just going through a quick OCR technology here, and it's going to pick all that data up. So I'm going to quickly add that expense over into the expense report. So I picked up this taxi. So from a user, no burden as far as asking what information is there, but what you will see is that this taxi line item here, I have this distribution, and again, what I now have there is that association back to this Vegas kickoff meeting for 2017. Now, let's say this person happened to be working in the marketing side of the organization, and part of this was going to be allocated not only to this trip that's taking place right now, but they may have been also, maybe they were actually doing a site visit for next year, and they want to split this allocation. I can take this airfare distribution, and maybe I want to track part of it to the Vegas 2018 kickoff meeting, and come in here and split this 50-50, which I can do very easily. And now what I've done is I've now not only taken this taxi cab, which is being allocated to one event, I'm now going to take the airfare and split it out to two events. So as we look at this process, what you're now capturing here behind the scenes, and I'm just going to open up another view here for you. So I'm just going to open up this expense report that we've been completing. But what you'll notice here is that for this individual expense report, what I'm able to pick up is the cost allocations as it relates to the individual events that I'm traveling to. I can see the days that I traveled to. So I have all the same traditional information that you would see within a typical expense report. But now we're able to leverage that technology, which again, I would say looking at more of a project environment, and to have that information take place. Employee is going to go ahead and submit this information on. It's going to get approved, and of course, I'm kind of leading off some of those individual details that would relate to the individual expense process. But what you'd also see here is now on the reporting front, as it relates to this information out there, and I'm just opening up the reporting platform here within Data Basics. But what you're now able to see here is as I come in on a reporting side, what I can do is start looking at information. Now, in this case, I've got a double code number. So this is the name of the number for the event that was in there. I should have had the name set up here so you could see this. So this would be Vegas kickoff. But what you're able to see is individual users. I can see individual expenses. And if I even want to see the travel dates, I can go ahead and open this up and say, okay, well, on September 5th, we spent $3,500 on airfare, and on October 10th, we spent $340. What I can also do is go in here during this view and actually create individual queries. So if I want to go out here and say, you know what, I'm not really concerned with each individual. I don't want to see all the employees. What I'd rather do is go out and just see certain employees. I can now come into this view, and if I want to pick on just Chris Harley, what you'll see now is this screen's going to quickly change. And actually, you know what? I picked the date format. Let me grab a different user out there. And what I can do is I'm able to get to the information and to see the individual users and who that in fact is. So as it relates to the overall view here, what you're seeing again is the ability for a very easy entry on the user side. Enter it once and had it there for the rest of the report. It becomes part of the reporting platform. And lastly, as it relates to the budgeting side of the application, it also allows us to go out there and run budgets through the Data Basics module in order to meet those requirements. So really, in summarizing the process out there, what you're looking at here is a solution out there where we're able to go out there and to quickly leverage what we would traditionally call a project functionality in a non-project environment that's going to give you information and visibility much easier. We're going to do it without putting any burden on the end user. And lastly, what we're going to do is to be able to provide you guys a solution that can do all the heavy lifting, all the cost accounting you need, and provide you all the reporting you need without having to do anything else there from an application perspective. So with that, let me see what kind of questions may have popped up. Again, I've got one question that people always ask is, can we have these slides to share? And the answer is definitely. We will send everyone who sat in on this webinar a copy of this, so you guys have this. You can also find it at the Data Basics Resource Library, which is at our website, which is data-basics.com, or my email address here is also here, and you guys can feel free to reach out directly to me, and I can provide any additional information. So with that, let me see what kind of questions we have here. One of the first questions relates more to the technology out there, which is our application provided in a cloud-based offering? So yes, the application is provided in a cloud-based or software service offering. What we provide for all our customers is 2 instances of the system, so you always have a test and a production environment out there. Once the application is up and running, I mentioned earlier, you have the ability to integrate this data between our platform and any other platform that may sit out there. And of course, as it relates to the data we were talking about today as we look at that project data, if you are using a project-based tool, we could certainly pull over the project data out of your project accounting system. If you're not, within the Data Basics platform, we do have our own ability for you to set up all those activities within the solution to be able to get to that information. Next question here relates to pricing. How is the application priced? Within the solution, you have the ability we basically price the application based upon expense reports created. So if you're doing 200 expense reports a month, it's going to be 200 times X dollars. If you're doing 2,000 expense reports a month, same sort of process. The higher the volume of expense reports you're pushing through the system, the lower cost per report out there as it relates to that. Next question is approval workflows. Is there any sort of approval workflow based upon the items entered into the solution? Yes, I should have mentioned that. So I think I mentioned earlier the policy compliance. But if you're going to build an event, for example, that Vegas kickoff event that I had within the expense tool, if that's an event that you have in the solution, and you want to have a special workflow based upon that, that's built into the application. So once someone submits an expense that has that expense in there, it will go off and follow that throughout that entire process. You can have multiple approvers out there. The other thing I should have mentioned is we talked about approvals as well as entries. Everything that I showed you here today, even though I was looking at the web experience, can also be done there on a mobile device. Let's see, other questions here. Data storage. How long do we store data? Typically, we're going to store data for 7 years. within the solution. So we will house it within our environment for 7 years. If you want to have that data offloaded to you in a more frequent basis, that's just fine. But our standard is 7 years. Data integration, and this question is specific to an individual accounting system. Let me just mention from an accounting perspective, we really work with all major accounting platforms. We do have a couple different partnerships out there, so Microsoft Dynamics, NetSuite, Intact would be the 3 major accounting solutions that we have formal partnerships with. But with that being said, we certainly integrate with all the other players out there. So we look at SAP, Oracle, JD Edwards, Spectrum, Infor. If you name it, like I said, it's tough to find one that we've yet to integrate with. But at this point in this day and age, everyone's going to provide an open platform for us to integrate data to and from with, and that is something that we would certainly look to have take place here within the solution. Let's just see, there's a couple more questions, and I'll answer one more, but then at that point, what I will do is the rest of the questions that came up here, guys, I will certainly either myself or someone else here on the staff database will get back to you within about a day or so. Last question just relates to support. Is there any sort of support, or how does support take place within the solution? So yes, Data Basics does have a support team. As a matter of fact, it's an award-winning support team. We've with the 2nd year in a row where we've won an award for the support that our team offers. Support is all based here in North America. It is all handled by Data Basics employees, and it is 24/7. So in the event that you are utilizing our solution, you have some sort of question, concern, or issue, you can pick the phone up. You can access us through the web. We will respond immediately. There's a formal escalation policy or process that the items will go through. But of course, throughout that process, you've got complete visibility into the entire event of the resolution of whatever item you may have there. So with that, we're approaching here the bottom part of the hour, and I promise not to take more than 30 minutes or so here today. So I did want to thank everyone for sitting in on this webinar. Again, I will provide a copy of this back out to you, both the slides as well as a recording if you would like to see that recording. If you had a question that I did not get a chance to answer, I will certainly, again, myself or someone else here will reach out with that answer for you. And if there's anything else we can do to help you guys, please feel free to reach out. And otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll be in touch soon. Thank you very much.